Acapulco has become Mexico's murder capital due to a merciless drug war between gangs. Workers recover a dismembered body dumped in the middle of the afternoon.
Entre el sábado 13 y domingo 14 de noviembre del 2010 se escribió una de las páginas más presentes en la historia de la violencia reciente en México, el asesinato de Alejo Garza Tamés.
Heroes come in many forms. They can be law enforcement officers, soldiers, firefighters, paramedics, doctors, or even nurses. In a functioning society, anyone can become an honorary hero, but in a dysfunctional world, you will find many accidental heroes because they have no choice but to fight for the betterment of mankind. This is the brave Mexican who was tortured for killing cartel members. It is no secret that the nation of Mexico has been overwhelmed by the violent activities of cartels for decades. In many ways, the roots and organization of the cartels have deeply permeated the country's system. The ongoing battle between law enforcement and criminal organizations has not come to an end yet. As the years pass, cartels are becoming increasingly prominent, provoking the rise of violence and unnecessary death. It has taken a collaborative effort of the United States and Mexico's federal authorities to keep these cartels and organizations at bay, but there is still much work to do to restore peace and keep communities safe from cartel violence. Most importantly, Mexican civilians fall victims to the brutality and cruelty of these major gangs. Firstly, the people living in areas plagued by cartels are extremely afraid of losing their lives because drug cartel violence often involves brutal and public displays of power, including assassinations, mass killings, and beheadings. The fear generates an atmosphere of terror, making it difficult for residents to feel safe in their own neighborhoods. Imagine constantly having to watch your back when you leave home to go to work, or not being able to have your children walk home from school, fearing you will never see them again. Secondly, the violence caused by drug cartels leads to displacement and forced migration. Many families and individuals are forced to flee their homes to seek safety elsewhere, and the usual destination to seek asylum is the United States, because it's right across the border. Over the years, the U.S. has faced a lot of pressure to provide asylum and aid to those fleeing violence from across the border. This displacement disrupts communities, separates families, and puts a strain on resources in the areas that receive the displaced people. Also, cartels engage in various human rights abuses, including kidnapping, mass killings, and torture. These abuses further damage the judicial system, creating an environment of impunity. Finally, the presence of powerful crime organizations can undermine the authority of local and state governments, leading to weakened and flawed governance. Cartels may exert their power and control over certain areas, challenging official institutions to provide basic services and maintain law and order.
Do you feel as though the government and the military and the police are outgunned by the cartels?
Yeah, totally. They are all
Totally.
gunned. Yeah. In some cases, yeah, they are.
They started taking over corrupt trade unions. So it wasn't just a fight about the drug trade of the United States. It was a fight about controlling every inch of territory and all of the businesses in this territory.
Basically, these cartels are taking over the role of law enforcement and imposing their own directives on civilians. They're probably not big fans of human rights and democracy. You can only imagine the fear that is instilled in these communities. These cartels are able to undermine law enforcement, which means that if something happens, you cannot count on the authorities to come save you. You're literally left to the mercy of these drug cartel people. This is why we need to highlight the story of Alejo Garza Tamés, better known as Don Alejo. He's known to be the man who heroically stood up against the Los Zetas cartel to defend his ranch in Tamaulipas. His story could be compared to the biblical tale of David and Goliath. Don Alejo lived a life like any other man. He was born in 1933 in Allende, Nuevo León. He was raised in a wooded hillside of the state. Don Alejo's father owned a sawmill, and he grew up helping his father harvest and sell lumber at their stores in Montemorales and Allende, along with his brothers. As you can tell, Don Alejo was raised to be a hard worker. The man had a good reputation in his community for his reliable and honest work. His friends and family stated that a promise from Don Alejo was as good as a contract. So Don Alejo was a hardworking farmer, a dependable member of the community, and an amazing person to be around. Life couldn't get any better. And to add a cherry on top, Don Alejo had a wonderful family. He and his wife Leticia Torrijos had two beautiful daughters, Marcela and Alejandra. Good things come in pairs. At the time, there were open lands for sale at fair prices. With the help of his brothers, Don Alejo bought 4,942 acres of land next to a dam that connected the towns of Güemes and Padilla in the nearby state of Tamaulipas. He planned to make money from the ranch by fishing, farming, and raising livestock. Don Alejo spent the next few decades of his life dedicating his time to farming and building his family ranch. He even named his ranch home San Jose in honor of his father, Jose Garza. Don Alejo had literally built a legacy for his family from his sweat and tears.
No, para él era muy importante el rancho. Si nosotros queríamos darle un regalo, el más grande era acompañarlo al rancho.
Everything was working well for Don Alejo and his family. The sun was shining and the birds were singing. Nothing seemed like it could go wrong. However, life always has a way of raining on your parade. Don Alejo's peaceful life was invaded by none other than the notorious Los Zetas cartel. You see, Don Alejo is what you would call the polar opposite of cartels. Instead of taking, stealing, robbing, and extorting people of their hard-earned money, he worked hard to support himself and his loved ones. He's the definition of everything that's right in this society. And the Los Zetas cartel is anything but righteous. Therefore, they have no problem claiming things that aren't theirs, and they'll take them out of your cold, dead arms if they have to. On November 13th, 2010, the Los Zetas cartel came to Don Alejo's ranch home and knocked on his door like the devil was coming to collect his souls. Obviously, they weren't there to sell Don Alejo a pyramid scheme or ask him to complete a survey. The Zetas had something much larger in mind. When Don Alejo answered the door, the Los Zetas gang members demanded that he surrender his ranch over to them, but Don Alejo refused. This was a daring move because there were quite a number of armed cartel members at his door, and the situation could take a bad turn if he upset them. But Don Alejo is the type of person who doesn't cower away from danger. This is his farmland and legacy. He's not just going to hand it over to them. Don Alejo stood his ground against the Zetas. The gang decided to provide him with a more generous offer. They gave him 24 hours to pack up his things and vacate the ranch, which means they were allowing him to gather some of his home's valuable items so he wouldn't lose everything and violence could be avoided. Imagine someone comes into your home, announces that you have 24 hours to vacate the area, and they'll take over your house. It doesn't sound right, but shockingly, it's not that uncommon. We need to take a little flashback to the 2000s, when the Los Zetas started rebelling against their former ally, the Gulf Cartel. Turf wars ignited throughout the country, and people's lives were devastated due to their ongoing battle.
Los Zetas is a powerful and violent criminal syndicate in Mexico, and is considered by the U.S. government to be the most technologically advanced, sophisticated, and dangerous cartel in Mexico. They are most notoriously known as a cartel with an affinity for indiscriminate, brutal violence, torture, kidnapping, and slaughter.
The Gulf Cartel was one of the major cartels in Mexico. In the late 1990s, they were engaged in a fierce struggle with the Sinaloa cartel over control of the drug smuggling routes. Once they were able to secure those drug smuggling routes, an internal battle broke out within the organization. There are two reasons for this internal struggle. One is the power shift within the cartel. Some of the major clan leaders within the Gulf Cartel were either arrested or killed by federal authorities. Therefore, the members of the cartel started fighting amongst themselves over leadership positions. Then there's the problem with the different sectors within the cartel. Usually, when gangs and cartels engage in a partnership or alliance, it's a symbiotic relationship, which means both sides are mining for benefits. Most cartels' alliances end in dispute because they're too power-hungry. They're only using each other to get stronger, and once they reach a certain stage, they'll break it off or turn against their former partner. It's the nature of the cartel industry. In this case, the Los Zetas had gained enough benefit and power from the Gulf Cartel over the years. Now they were strong enough to break free and maybe even become one of the most powerful cartels in North America. The possibilities are endless. And that's exactly what they did. In 2010, the Zetas declared their independence from the Gulf Cartel. After the split, turf wars broke out between the two. In the midst of the wars, it became a common ritual for farmers to be extorted by these cartels.
In Michoacán, the avocado industry, first they start like taxing them with like 10% of their gains, and then they say like, why is not easier just to take over? Give me like the property titles, or I will kidnap your daughter, I will extort you if you don't, I'm gonna shoot you, and that's what happened. They're taking over.
If you're doing well, they kill you or disappear you, or they come and pull you and your family out of your house. And they take away your orchard and they cultivate it and take all the money. They just say, I like your land, I like your house, you have to vacate it. You have 24 hours to leave. And if you don't, they come and kill you. They are willing to kill from the cat up. They spare no one.
Because the rural area of Mexico is practically run by cartels and crime organizations, and there are cartel battles happening almost every 5 seconds. It became a very dangerous place for ranch and farm owners. So what these cartels would do is they would offer farmers a protection service for a certain fee. Basically, they would demand to take a cut of the hard-earned money from the locals in the area under the name of security. It's a glorified way to phrase extortion, because who are they protecting these people from? How will a cartel protect them from a cartel? It's redundant. If they wanted to protect the civilians, they would have stopped creating turf wars and killing the innocents. Also, if the farmers don't comply with their demands, they'll have to answer to violence and threats. Therefore, most people would agree to their ridiculous arrangements because they have no choice. Either give them the money or die.
Now all of this has exploded. The extortion, killings, you have to pay for protection. I'm afraid of losing my family or having them lose me.
Unlike other cartels, Los Zetas are known to terrorize their enemies using the shock and awe tactics, which include torturing, killing, beheading, and inhumane punishments. One very brutal but unfortunately common torture method used by this gang is called el guiso, which means stew. In this method, they would put the victims inside oil barrels, pour gasoline on them, and set them on fire, causing them unimaginable pain and suffering. You can see why it is not wise to try and counter their demands. Unfortunately, extortion is not all they do. Sometimes the cartel would evict farmers and ranchers from their own land and take over their property for shady purposes, like creating training camps or establishing hideouts. Once again, this is a common practice. Cartels would commit these unlawful acts simply because they can, because they believe no one would dare stand up against them, and the authorities are no help. Law enforcement is useless in these areas. They couldn't do anything to help these people. Cartels practically run the countryside of Mexico.
They've been dropping bombs from the drones, and we have the military right here, but it doesn't seem like they're interested in stopping the other guys from dropping all those bombs.
Which is why Don Alejo found himself face to face with the Los Zetas gang at his door, demanding that he surrender his property to them. Don Alejo knew this would happen one day. He spent most of his life avoiding troubles, hoping he could live out his simple life. Unfortunately, troubles found their way to his doorstep. So the Zetas gave him 24 hours to get his stuff and leave his own home. But Don Alejo stood his ground and told them he would not leave his ranch. This upset the gang members, who took back their first offer and gave him an ultimatum. They said they would return that night to claim the property, and if Don Alejo was still there, they would treat him like a trespasser. What Don Alejo did next was unexpected. He told the Zetas he wouldn't be going anywhere and would wait for them to return. Not buying his words, the gang left. Don Alejo knew that he could not go to the authorities because it would do him no good. Cartel's domain has taken over law enforcement in rural Mexico. Besides, the Los Zetas are known to rain violence across the country. Even the federal authorities are having a hard time battling their forces.
Last week, you had the worst massacre in this entire drug war, with 72 migrants killed by the Zetas, one of the cartels that operates primarily just below Laredo and Brownsville, Texas. They actually operate all over Mexico, but that's sort of their home base. They're accused of gunning down 72 migrants. That's obviously the worst massacre that's occurred in what's an incredibly bloody drug war here.
Un par de miembros de los Zetas se van a Estados Unidos y empiezan a colaborar con las autoridades americanas y al parecer también se llevan una gran cantidad de dinero de la organización. Unos miembros de los Zetas que estaban en Tamaulipas lleguen a Allende, Coahuila, a las casas y ranchos de estos hombres y de los familiares y de algunos amigos de ellos a buscar a las personas que había ahí, fueran mujeres, niños, adultos.
Que estoy trabajando, me habla el que era el papá de mi hija y me dice que levantaron a Ana. Mi hija quería buscarla, quería que todo mundo me ayudara. Nadie me ayudó.
Las autoridades nada, no.
Nadie. Cuando supe de mi hija, yo me quise volver loca porque yo siempre la buscaba viva. Yo nunca esperé encontrarla ni que nadie me dijera que mi hija estaba muerta.
So Don Alejo decided not to contact the authorities for help, but to take matters into his own hands. He rounded up all the people who worked on his farm and told them to take the next few days off. Don Alejo didn't want them to be involved in the pending tragic event that was about to take place on his ranch. Although Don Alejo didn't inform them about the Los Zetas, his workers could sense that there was something not right about their boss. Don Alejo managed to send everyone home early and began his preparation process. Unknown to the cartel members, Don Alejo was a skilled hunter. He was known in the community to be a talented hunter and fisherman. Therefore, he had acquired a large collection of hunting rifles. Don Alejo rounded up all his hunting weapons and placed them near his doors and windows. He turned his home into a fortress of some sort and waited for the cartel to come to him. By sunset, Don Alejo made one last call to his wife, Leticia Torrijos, to tell her, "I love you very much." His wife replied with the same passion, and Don Alejo told Leticia that he would call her the next day at 8 a.m. They agreed and hung up. The night came and went, and the sun began to rise. Don Alejo continued to wait for the gang to come. Around 4 a.m. in the morning, loud honkings, flashing lights, and firearms blazing in the air announced the arrival of the Los Zetas. They were staking their claim to the new territory. Then, out of nowhere, the sound of a random gunshot stopped them in their tracks. The shot didn't come from the cartel members. It came from the house, and it belonged to Don Alejo's rifle. The Zetas were stunned by the confrontation. They didn't expect Don Alejo to still remain at the ranch. The cartel members thought they could scare him away with their threats, so they weren't prepared for the attack. Unexpectedly, Don Alejo turned out to be a great gunman. He outperformed many of the cartel members. The tactic he used was simple. Don Alejo positioned himself next to the windows and took out the Zetas one by one. He managed to kill 4 and injure 2 of their members. Don Alejo was determined to protect his life's work and his family home at all costs. Eventually, the Zetas were intimidated by Don Alejo's strategy. They knew they couldn't win against him in a shootout, but they weren't willing to retreat. Out of options, the cartel members decided to utilize a more blunt method. Keep in mind that the Zetas have access to a vast amount of sophisticated weapons, probably even more advanced than the authorities. They came at Don Alejo's with rifles and grenade launchers. Yes, grenade launchers. They couldn't win against him in a fair battle, so they decided to destroy everything. The cartel opened fire at Don Alejo's house, causing a large disturbance in the area. And indeed, Don Alejo was no match for their deadly weapons. Yet the Zetas still couldn't take over the property. The amount of damage and ruckus caused by this incident was so massive that it alarmed the surrounding communities. The Mexican Marines were summoned to the scene, and what they saw was the aftermath of an intense battle. At the scene, the Marines found 4 dead cartel members and 2 unconscious members. And when they finally located Don Alejo's body, the authorities were shocked that it was only one man behind the defense against the cartel's large-scale attack. At 77 years old, Don Alejo single-handedly fought off a brutal attack by one of the deadliest cartels in Mexico, killing 4 and injuring 2 of their gunmen. Despite the numerical superiority on their side, the Zetas had no way of defeating Don Alejo, one man with a rifle, without using advanced weapons. It was a cowardly move, but the damage was done. In the end, nothing was achieved but bloodshed. And the most heartbreaking part of the story is Don Alejo's wife never received her husband's phone call the next morning. She waited and waited, only to be informed that her husband was killed mercilessly by the Los Zetas cartel. To the public, Don Alejo was a hero, but to his family, he was a father, husband, and brother. This incident is a perfect example of how cartel violence has negatively affected the lives of civilians. A world where people cannot trust authorities and law enforcement to protect them is a world where no one is safe. Hopefully, the Mexican government will soon conquer this nightmare of cartels and gangs' brutality and provide their people with peace and security. Do you think Don Alejo was an accidental hero or a victim? What are your thoughts on cartel violence in Mexico? Please don't forget to like, subscribe, and ring the bell for notifications.